Go ahead.
Yep, you're on.
Hello, I'm Philip Zimbardo. I'm a professor of psychology at Stanford University in Stanford, California, where I have taught since 1968. Before that, I taught at Yale University, where I got my Master of Science degree and my PhD in 1959. I taught at Yale for a couple of years, and then I taught at New York University for 6 years and Columbia University for 1 year before coming to Stanford. I am the author of about 100 or more professional articles and chapters and over 20 books. Some of my books are here. The most popular is a book called Psychology and Life, now going into its 14th edition. It is the oldest continuously selling textbook in all of psychology. I've done the last 7 editions, taking over from Floyd Rue, who was the author of the first 7. But in addition, and this book is used by hundreds of thousands of students all over the country, and now we have a European edition, so it will be worldwide. In addition, I've done pioneering research on shyness in adults and the shy child, as you can see here. I set up the first shyness clinic in the United States to help people who are shy overcome their shyness and be more socially effective. The third area that I published in is in the area of social influence and attitude change. I wrote a book, Influencing Attitudes and Changing Behavior. That was in 2 editions. And more recently, 2 years ago, I wrote a book, The Psychology of Attitude Change and Social Influence. The other main thing I've been doing of late is I wrote, organized, narrated a 26-part television series called Discovering Psychology, sponsored by the Annenberg Foundation and produced by station WGBH in Boston. It is a complete introductory psychology course used in thousands of colleges and now high schools throughout the United States and in 7 different countries. And it presents both a scientific view of psychology, but also tries to show how psychology applies to life in areas of health and education, resolving conflicts in the space program. 56,000 students have gotten college credit in introductory psychology without a teacher, but this replaced the teacher. Viewing the series, reading a textbook, mine or some others, and taking a standard test. And that was as of 2 years ago. By now we think the figure might soon be approaching 100,000. In addition to writing and being involved in, let's call it outward bound teaching through television, I teach intensively at Stanford University. I love to teach. I teach many different courses, and I do research. The kind of courses I teach the big introductory psychology class at Stanford, which varies in enrollment from 250 to 750 students at one time. I teach a course in social psychology, and I think of myself as a social psychologist. We're interested in all the ways in which individuals are influenced by other people, while they're interacting with them, or sometimes even imagining what other people would say or do or think if they were around. I teach courses in the psychology of time perspective, in research methods. I teach courses in how to teach, training graduate students how to teach. But perhaps the most interesting course that I teach, which I've organized and I'm teaching currently, is the psychology of mind control. And this is really a broad panorama of all the ways in which people are influenced by other people, starting with issues of attitude change and social influence, why we comply, why we're influenced by the media, by advertising, how different organizations, different groups can affect the way we feel and think and influence our attitudes, how authorities persuade us, get us to obey, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse. We include studies of the Holocaust and how government control through ideology, as in Nazi times. And we move up through a whole major concern about cults. And that what's most interesting about cults is they typically embody many of the principles that we've seen leaders use when we study leadership, that media and advertising people use to get your attention, to hold it, principles of compliance and obedience. And the thing that's most interesting is that they typically use them all. They combine all of these techniques. And what I try to show my students is that the influence that cults have, and it can be enormous, doesn't come from any exotic technology. I mean, doesn't come from any mystical things. But really, it's the practical, systematic, and intense application of these basic principles that we know can influence most people in most situations. And in fact, really the basic theme, or the basic message of all of social psychology, is that we underestimate the power that situations can have over our behavior. By that I mean things that when we are standing back, being rational, all alone, we say, no, this is something I would not do. I could not be led to do this. I'm not that kind of person. So we think we know ourselves. We think we have a sense of who we are and what we would do. But really, all we really know is what we've done in the past. So when you're asked, would you do this kind of thing? And you say, no. I mean, really what you're saying is, I haven't done it in the past. I don't think I would do it in the future. But you're totally unaware of the power that leaders can play, the powers that a group, just being part of a group where everybody else is saying, let's do it, let's go for it. We typically underestimate the power of uniforms. Suddenly you're dressed in a uniform of some kind, a team uniform, you're part of a team. Or you're given a role to play. Somebody, even if it's make-believe, somebody says, why don't you be a prisoner and I'll be the guard? Why don't you be the cops and he'll be the robbers? And why don't you be the cavalry and they'll be the Indians? And what can often start off as a game very quickly can merge into reality. So that when you begin to accumulate all of these little powerful situational forces, rules and roles and uniforms and groups and powerful leaders, now you're asked to do that thing that an hour ago, a day ago, you said, no way. And suddenly you cross the threshold from either doubt or certainty you would do it to now you're beginning to do it. And social psychologists have come up with an interesting concept called the fundamental attribution error. And what it means is that all of us, even very skilled, trained psychologists, are prey to two kinds of intellectual errors. The first is we tend to overestimate the extent to which our actions are totally controlled by things inside of us, things we call personality traits or our character. And we underestimate, the second error we make, it's called cognitive bias, is that we underestimate the power of these situational forces. And what that means is that makes us more vulnerable to the confidence man, to the shill artist, to unjust authority, and in some cases to recruiters, whether they are recruiting for some bogus business or some cult. In that sense, we're vulnerable because we think we have an illusion that we are invulnerable. We couldn't do what other people did. We say, not me. But the second message of social psychology is really a message which conveys a sense of humility, to say, anything that any human being has ever done, there is the possibility that you would do it too, no matter how extreme, horrendous, or evil. And you really should start with that sense of humility. And then the next question is, tell me about the situation they were in that made them do it. So instead of saying, they're different from me, therefore they did it and I wouldn't, and then what you're going to do is walk into the same quicksand and sink, just as they did. But if you know there's a certain kind of quicksand out there, then you can anticipate it and walk around it. So what we try to do with this course is not only teach students to appreciate the power and subtlety of these influence attempts, we also try to teach them how you anticipate them. What are the cues you use to unjust authority, to deceptive kinds of recruiting, to appeals which are really exploitative, where someone gains and you lose. Now, all of influence does not have to be exploitative, it does not have to be deceptive. Parents influence kids to eat healthy foods, to avoid unsafe health practices, avoid associating with dangerous, bad company. Teachers try to influence students to think critically, to think independently. The problem is when influence includes deceptive practices where you're unaware of it. Somebody's pretending to be a friend, somebody's pretending to care, somebody's pretending to do it for you when in fact you end up doing it for them. You do the work, you give them the money, they get rich, and you get tired and poor. So it's that kind of thing that I've been trying to do in my writing and my teaching, to say we have to be sensitive to all the ways in which we as individuals, rational, strong, intelligent, healthy, normal individuals, yet we are vulnerable to what's been called influence professionals, people who make their whole life out of trying to persuade us to buy a product, to buy their service, and in some cases to join their group. Now again, some of the products we buy are good, some of the services we need, some of the groups we join, are fine to help us. The problem is some services we buy we don't need, some products we buy we don't only need, but like cigarettes, are dangerous to our health. And some of the groups that seduce us into joining can also be dangerous to our health. And so one of the things we try to look at is what are the kinds of guidelines that you should be aware of before you take that step to join a group, which could be dangerous, destructive, cost you time, money, really isolation from your family and friends, and have a major impact on who you think, what you are, what you're likely to do.
That's great. So, teaching a course called Mind Control, Psychology of Mind Control, what can you say are some of the key principles that groups use to get us to adopt new beliefs?
Okay, I think what I should add to what I said before is that the concept of mind control is controversial. That there are people who say there is no such thing as mind control. People are God gives us free will and a kind of independence from unwanted control. And there are people who want to believe in that kind of individual integrity. The individual has the might to rise above all of these kinds of influence attempts. And they say this is a kind of journalistic hoop-de-doo, like brainwashing. It's a fancy term applied to something that doesn't exist. Well, if you break it down and say, well, really mind control means four kinds of things. One is other people can control our access to information. They can tell us what to think, how to think, show us certain things, conceal other things. All education that is biased, that's distorted. How do kids learn prejudice? Well, some parents who are prejudiced tell them, here's the information, look at this, listen to this, observe this kind of thing. Whereas parents who are tolerant, control information for their kids, help them make up their mind. Obviously the government does it, the media does it. Also, some individuals, groups can control what we do. They simply reward us for doing some things, punishing us for doing other things, and we know the basic principle in psychology is we tend to learn and perform what we get reinforced for, and we stop doing things we get punished for. That's at the simplest level. Certainly when we're in a group, and everybody in a group is doing it and says, do it. And do it could be smoke cigarettes, take drugs, practice unsafe sex, let's steal this thing, let's beat up homosexuals, whatever it is. Initially you would say, no, that's not my kind of thing. Well, now everybody is doing it. If you don't do it, you're going to be socially ostracized. If you do it, you'll be accepted. And a lot of people cross that line. Another aspect or dimension of mind control is people can control our emotions through guilt, through making us feel shame, through threatening to withdraw their love if we don't do a certain kind of thing. And then ultimately, if we're talking about mind control, minds are thinking creatures. So that anything that makes us not think independently, think like the crowd, go with the flow, the kinds of things where we are told to think with our hearts rather than with our brains, well, there's no evidence that cardiac comprehension exists. Hearts do not think. They beat and they pump blood and that's all they do. But people want us to respond without thinking. So there are a whole set of techniques that various groups use, including cults, where they try to control our thinking. Now when you put that package together, some group or individual or set of procedures are controlling our information, are influencing what we think, are influencing how we feel, and ultimately are influencing how we behave. When you put that together, that package is what we mean by mind control. Now, for example, let me just give you a couple of experimental studies. And there is a whole literature in social psychology which illustrates each of these points that I've made. And I'm just going to touch on one or two classic studies, including, immodestly, one that I did. If I asked you, would you electrocute a stranger if Hitler told you to do it? Anyone asked that question now in the 1990s in the United States would say, no way, I'm not that kind of person. I'm not a Nazi. That was the 30s. Well, a colleague of mine, Stanley Milgram, asked that question and answered it in an interesting way. What he did was he had a shock box with 30 buttons, and each time you pressed the button, it delivered 15 volts of shock, which stepped up from 15 to 450. When you got to the end, the box was labeled XXX, danger, high voltage. And your job is to press one of those buttons every time someone makes a mistake. And you have to keep going, escalating up to the end if they keep making mistakes. And at the end, the person is screaming his brains out, he's got a heart condition, wants to quit the experiment, and you're getting $5 to be an experiment, to be the shocker. Would you go all the way? Virtually no one says yes. When clinical psychologists, psychiatrists are asked how many Americans would go all the way, they say not even 1%, only sadists. Well, Stanley Milgram did 19 experiments with more than 1,000 subjects. Not only college students at Yale, but business people, men and women, housewives, uneducated people. And the result was the same across all of these people. The majority went all the way. 2/3, in some experiments, 90% pressed that last button, thinking that at the very least they had incapacitated this person, they might have killed this person. But how did they do it? They just said, no way, I wouldn't do that. I'm not a Nazi, and now they're doing it. Well, what they ignored was a number of things that Stanley Milgram built into the situation. First, he gave them an ideology, and he said, we want to help people. We want to help people learn better. We want to help people improve their memory. Do you agree with that value system? And everyone said, sure. Well, we would like you to help us learn how to help people improve their memory. Research shows, and this is now his deception, which is equivalent to the deception practiced in advertising and many cults, is that psychologists know that reward helps learning, but we don't know whether punishment helps. Maybe if you use punishment in a judicious way, it could also improve learning. Would you like us to help? Would you like us to find that knowledge? Okay? So they agree. So this is now, all evil starts with a good cause, or a presumption of a good cause. Nobody says we'd like you to harm somebody, we'd like you to kill someone. So there's this semantic distortion, changing the wording. And now what happens is you say, okay, well, why don't you be the teacher? Well, that's a good role. So they're assigning it, and they have the person who's going to be the victim, who's really a confederate of the experimenter, but you don't know that. And he'll be the learner. And then here's the rules of the game. So you give now rules, which if you agree to go on, you have to follow the rules. Every time he makes a mistake, you press a button. Every time he makes the next mistake, you must escalate. Failure to respond is an error. If it takes too long, you have to keep going. And you accept all the rules, you say, ready to go, and then you begin. Well, and here's now an authority, I should add that. He's a scientist, it's done at a university, or it has a scientific flair, he's in a white lab coat. So you're underestimating the power that authorities have. This is science, this is education. And now you're going along, and he's learning pretty well, and then suddenly he begins to make errors, and you're shocking him, and you're getting up to 200 volts and 300, he starts screaming. he's now also in the next room, which makes it easier. If he's remote and you don't see the pain, then you don't see him showing the pain. There's not the compassion that you would feel when it's face to face. And you tell the experimenter, gee, he wants to quit. I don't want to go on. I'm not that kind of person. Who'll be responsible? Experimenter says, I'll be responsible. So now the experimenter is allowing you to diffuse the responsibility. So that you say, okay, well, I'm not responsible. He's responsible. Well, that's not true. You're pressing the button. And so it goes up and it gets to 300 volts. Press the button. He screams. There's a thud and there's silence. Okay. He may be unconscious with his heart attack or whatever. You tell the experimenter what's going on. Everyone says, the rules of the game say, failure to respond, remember I told you it's an error, you have to keep going. So now you're shocking him when he's not responding. How could he be learning? How could punishment improve his memory? But you're so confused that you stop thinking, and what you do is you just want to get out, and you don't know how to get out of the situation, because every time you say, I don't want to do it, I'm not that kind of person, he says, yes, I know, the rules of the game say you must go on as well. So you don't know how to exit. The only way to exit is get to that last 450 volt button, press the button, and then the experiment's over. And this is what happened. 2/3 of the people went all the way. So this is really an interesting model for how any person could be seduced into doing something that is against their values, against their personality, against their belief, that before the experiment they would sign and say, no way would I do this, and now they're doing it. I did a similar study some years back where I wanted to show that you don't even need an authority figure there saying you must go on, you must go on. I created a mock prison at Stanford University where we picked the most normal, the most healthy people we could from students who were from all over the country who were in the San Francisco area in the summer. We told them we wanted to study prison life. We had half of them, we assigned randomly to be prisoners and half to be guards. So there's no difference at the beginning. It's a random assignment of really good, healthy, normal kids. And we put them in an environment which was basically evil, a prison-like environment where the guards, all of whom were uniformed, were given total control over the prisoners. And without anyone telling the guards what to do, that is, we simply counted on the fact that they would have learned what it means to be a guard in a prison from novels, from movies, from seeing power relationships. Within a very short time, the guards began to escalate their level of verbal aggression, physical aggression, began to dehumanize these other people, began to do obscene kinds of things to them. The prisoners rebelled as a group. The rebellion didn't work. And then they began to split apart separately. A number of the prisoners had emotional breakdowns and had to be released. Some of them had incredible stress reactions. And the ones that remained were like zombies, totally isolated, no group cohesion. And the experiment was supposed to run for 2 weeks. We ended it in 6 days because it was totally out of control. It was normal, healthy, the best and brightest college students, chosen for all these good virtues, were behaving sadistically, violently, really, if you will, in evil ways, if they were simply put in the guardrail, given the uniform, given the trappings of total power, while other boys, equally normal, equally healthy, who didn't do anything, never broke the law, were acting like, were behaving pathologically, having emotional breakdowns, acting like in a zombie-like way, just like we've seen in prisoners of war, in Korean War and Vietnam, because they were in the assigned role of prisoner, a role that had no power. So that study simply shows how powerful a situation could be when you're in it. Now, before the students went into the role, we asked them, how likely is it that you would not be able to endure the 2-week experiment? And everyone said, you know, 0 probability that I couldn't do it. Of course I could do it. So the main point is, it's hard for us to often appreciate the power that these things have when we're looking in from the outside. When we read about a cult, we read about Jonestown, the Jonestown People's Temple cult, where over 900 American citizens committed suicide, and previously mothers and fathers killed their children by giving them cyanide, killed their parents by giving them cyanide, and then took their own life Those who refused were shot, and they were shot by fellow members of the group, their friends, their family, at the command of Reverend Jim Jones. Well, it's not that he simply gave them a command. They were in a Milgram-like experiment where their compliance was escalated, 15 volts at a time. They were in this group for several years. They were doing things they said they would never do. They were working hard, giving him all of their money, giving him all their time, separating husbands from wives, parents from children. Then he says we have to leave Los Angeles and San Francisco, where they were set up, to go to this jungle in Guyana. So you're getting people from urban ghettos moving to a jungle where they were ill-equipped to live. And then, so what you got is this end product where people made the ultimate sacrifice, committed suicide, killed family members, because they were programmed over a number of years to blindly obey his authority, one, that their will to think critically, independently had been broken, and that this was really just one more step. This was the 450 volts that they had now already endured by given the 415 volts. So this was just one last step. And there are many, many more experiments I could give. We don't have time. I just want to summarize and say that there is a body of scientific evidence that is accepted by professionals in the field, that has been replicated, reproduced by other people, that simply says individuals can be induced, recruited, seduced into behaving in ways that are totally alien to their nature, to their character, to their personality, everything they think they are, when they are in one of these powerful total situations. The more the situation controls their information, their thoughts, their behavior, their emotions, the more extreme the transformation we can see. Now, you haven't changed the person because you take them out of that situation, you put them back in their real life, back in the old situation, and they are the same old people. Our prisons and guards didn't stay sadistic when they left the experiment. They were not crazed after they left. But they were only in there for 6 weeks. What happens if you're in a cult group for 6 years or 10 years? Well, then it's going to be much harder to go back to the old situation because the old situation is not there in the same way. The life has changed. The people you used to relate to are different. Also, the group may have had you break the contacts with family, with friends. So in a sense, there is not the same situation to go back with. You have to now transform your life in exiting from this group and recreating really a new life based on maybe the best of what you had before, but really is a new, the very difficult task you have in leaving one of these groups. And in a way, I don't even think it's very different from people who leave a prison after they've been in prison for 10 or 15 years, or led a life in the military. That is, you're leaving a highly structured life where you have a role, where everything is arranged for you, you have very little personal obligation other than to follow the rules, and now that all ends because you exit from the group for whatever reason. We see it, for example, now in communism. The real difficulty people throughout the communist world have in adjusting to instant democracy. Well, if for 30, 40 years everything is done for you, the structure is there that you simply fit in, now you say, gee, that's really bad and evil, let's get rid of it. Many, many people throughout Eastern Europe have great difficulties now readjusting. And so the task of somebody leaving a cult, especially a destructive cult, is a very difficult one that I as a psychologist can sympathize with the difficulty in making that transition, but clearly it is possible, and step one is to realize how you have been manipulated and how your mind has been controlled. And what you want to do is, you want your mind to be controlled, but you want to control it. You want more of the control to come from within you. The key is avoiding those powerful situations that can influence almost all of us, me as well as you.
That's great. And so to restate, those people who are being told that social science has dismissed the issue of mind control, that there's no such thing, what do you have to say specifically about that?
Yeah, there's apparently a group of people who want to promote the notion that there is no such thing as mind control. And in part, it's another form of deception. By saying that, they really want people to say, oh, there's nothing that any group could do to you that you couldn't easily resist. And so they're creating kind of an illusion that you have the power to make a free choice and decision. And that is just not the case. That there are many situations, for example, where people are confused, where they're under stress, where they make very irrational decisions in their own life because of one person, because a spouse says something or a parent says something. And under those conditions, you don't have free choice. Okay? And what they want to do is, by giving you the illusion that you have the power to resist these things, that simply makes you more vulnerable, because then you're not attentive, you're not looking, you're not noticing what is it that they're doing, that all of these other people are doing this. So suppose, for example, somebody says, would you like to join our group, that we're going to promote world harmony, reduce world hunger, we're going to do good. And what you're doing is spending all of your time recruiting new members, begging for money, and you never see where that money is going, and you personally are never part of the good works deal. And you do this day in and day out for years. Well, you've been taken, you've been exploited, but now you're in what we call a dissonance situation. If you quit, how are you going to account for these 2 or 3 or 5 years that you've spent? And so you say, one more day, maybe it'll change. You want to believe exactly the way a woman whose husband abuses her when he's drunk. You want to believe, but he's really good when he's not drunk. And you hope for those not drunk days, but the question is, how long are you going to endure this abuse? So it is simply not the case that scientific research disproves the notion of mind control. I should also mention another colleague of mine, Robert Cialdini, who's at Arizona State University, who wrote a very important book called Influence. And he studied across many different real-life situations, salespeople of automobiles, of encyclopedias, fundraisers, charity groups, the techniques that these influence professionals use to get us to comply with their request to buy a product, buy a service. And he shows how powerful these techniques are to undermine our free will, to get us to buy things we don't need, to buy services we don't want. And he and other people have then taken these techniques, gotten from the real world into the laboratory, and showed even when you control the situation in a laboratory experiment, you can reproduce these results. So he would be another prominent social psychologist who would say, well, of course there's mind control. If you don't like the word mind control, it's just a word, then you can say, well, yeah, there's information control and thought control and behavior control and value control and ideology control and feeling control, and you put that all together, you could call it mind control or Buddha control. That's not the point. The point is individuals have been transformed from somebody they thought they knew to somebody they don't know. Individuals are now doing things that they said they would never do, and now they're doing it. Individuals who, by any reasonable moral standard, were behaving in a good way are now behaving in an evil way. People who were normal, healthy, productive citizens have now been transformed into being Nazis, killing people. So that you can't possibly say there's no such thing as mind control, given the experience we have with the Nazi SS. I mean, where thousands and thousands of people were transformed into being good, ordinary Germans, in many cases intellectual professionals. There were doctors and lawyers and chemists and engineers, into designing and maintaining and expanding death camps and responsible for killing thousands and thousands of Jews. Stanley Milgram's experiment says, okay, let's give a simulation of that kind of thing. But what he's simulating is to say, well, Americans could do it, anyone could do it. But the reality is, 6-8 million people were murdered by other members of their culture, by other members, by other Germans, put in a uniform, given an ideology, a belief system, told to play a role, as in Milgram study. So I would have to refute and object to the notion that scientific evidence does not support the concept of mind control.
And maybe you can pick up the book right there, that attitude change, because I think it's a brilliant book and it summarizes so much of the literature and research that's been done. Maybe you can say a few things about it.
Well, I mean, another way to answer your question is to invite you to read the book I wrote, Psychology of Attitude Change and Social Influence, with a colleague at Adelphi College, Michael Lively. And what we do is we review what is it that we know from the whole body of research by social psychologists on how people's attitudes are formed, what kinds of things change their attitudes, how they are influenced by other people, either one-on-one or in a group, how we're influenced by processes in education, how we're influenced by our families. We call that influence is called socialization. And then ultimately how you can package all of these techniques and strategies that influence professionals use and focus it in on something called cults. Now, in some cases we know the cults, I mean, a cult is obviously a negative term,